feel like this would be as a good a time as any to kind of admit's definitely not the right word, but say, you know, I ended up working with a therapist for a while. It was really, really important for me to actually finally admit that I needed to do that, and have those sessions for about 6 months. And now we still do one every couple of months or so, just as like a check-in. And you know, I don't want to take away from any of this being like, we always want to make it seem like simple, right? To empower people to just take the first step and try and work through this. But at the same time, your mind can be quite a complex place. So why would you not seek professional help to help you kind of move through what is ultimately the most important thing that you own? You know, if you wanted to learn a language, you'd probably hire an instructor, or at least get an app, right? If you wanted to learn an instrument, you'd get lessons. Like, okay, we have to have driving lessons. That's a bit different, but when you learn to drive, like you have driving lessons. So where do you see having, you know, someone like a therapist come in? At what point do you think that people should maybe consider that? Because if I'm being honest, for me, it was a good 2 to 3 years later than it ideally should have been.
Yeah, do you know what? It's such a great point. You can't think your way out of anxiety and depression. Like,
no, I tried.
Yeah, haven't we all?
I tried too hard. Ironically, it was part of the problem. But anyway,
we won't go down that road.
No, let's not.
Yeah, but it's such a good point. Like, this is all kind of, you know, this can support your mental health, but it's not. These are not tools for mental illness, and that's very different. So great point. I think realistically, if you've struggled for a long time, and if thoughts about food in your body are having a consistent negative impact on your life, then I would seek therapy if you can. It's not accessible to everyone, which is one of the problems, right? But obviously, I think a disclaimer here too is, if you think that you're struggling with an eating disorder, 100%. Go to your GP and they will support you with therapy. That's like a non-negotiable. If your GP hasn't been helpful, go and see another GP, or self-refer through IAPT, or find a private therapist. Like, all of these things are super important. But I think if you have access to it, and this is having a negative impact on your life, then just do it. And I think the statistics in terms of people that go for one session of therapy and then quit are wild. Like, a lot of people.
Really?
Yeah, a lot of people.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's because you don't get a therapist that you really gel with, and so you think, well, that therapy is not for me, so I'm just not going to do it. But persevere with it. And I've been to therapy before a couple of times, and I think it's important to persevere until you find someone. Because Instagram therapy is great, but like a reel or a carousel doesn't completely overhaul the way you think. It's weird.
Really, that isn't therapy?
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it?
Wow.
Weird. I've saved
when I said I
many
had
of them.
therapists, I actually just meant I followed a few Instagram accounts.
Yeah.
No, I did have actual therapy.
Some of them are great. But you can convince yourself that you've just, you know, people self-diagnose with all sorts now because they've seen it on Instagram, and I've healed this because this therapist told me it was this childhood wound, and it's just like, is it though? It might be.
Yeah. But
realistically, there's no shame in therapy. I love therapy. If someone says they've been to therapy, I'm like, oh, great, you're my type of person. Like, I'm up for that.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I'd love to, just frame that quickly, because as you correctly said, it's very privileged to be able to afford private therapy. I understand I was very privileged to be able to afford that. It's not cheap. And I had 3 sessions a week for like 6 months. So, understand I'm very privileged to be in that position to be able to do that. What you just said there, I've kind of got 2 questions to that. I mean, you probably know Gary from Tried, right? Heard of him? He had someone on his podcast that was kind of talking about how a lot of this diagnosis and awareness has almost gone too far, to the point where it's problematic. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that. Like, have we maybe gone too far trying to over-diagnose? People, as you said, are giving themselves Instagram diagnoses now. I feel like that's happening younger and younger. You're seeing a lot of people on TikTok being like, I've got this. And it's like, do you? So I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that, and how can someone someone kind of use a bit of their self-awareness based on any questions you might be able to advise, to be like, okay, is this me? Am I overanalyzing here? Have I misdiagnosed? Have I gone too far?
I think the thing is, don't try and diagnose yourself. Don't look at TikTok so many times that you know all of the symptoms of ADHD and then go to your doctor and say, I've got all of these symptoms of ADHD, you must have ADHD. And of course, the assessments are relatively stringent. They know these are professional people. They know what they're doing. If you're going to get a professional diagnosis and you're not self-diagnosing, don't self-diagnose anything. It's ludicrous. You wouldn't self-diagnose yourself with a broken arm. So why are you self-diagnosing with something like, again, ADHD as an example? So I do think we have a bit of an issue with that. Do I think it was needed? Potentially. It's kind of similar to the anti-diet movement. I think we've got an issue within the anti-diet movement of people shaming people who want to drop body fat and saying diets fail all the time. that's a problem. But do I think anti-diet was required to push back against diet culture? 100%. And so maybe we needed this pushback so that people did feel more comfortable talking about mental health and mental illness. But then I think this too is we're talking about mental health and like almost like socially acceptable neurodivergence and things like that. We're still not normalizing things that are like severe mental illness. So it's like, yeah, we're getting better, but realistically, we're only getting better on like the glamorous stuff and the stuff that people feel comfortable talking about. The harder stuff is still like we're still not there yet. I think the problem sometimes with it is that we just become very self-obsessed. So it's like, oh, I don't have a bad relationship with food anymore, but I'm so obsessed with self-awareness. Like that's my new preoccupation. It's like the idea is that you go and live your life now. You're not preoccupied by food. Not you go and find a new obsession to focus on, and it can become quite disconnecting because we then become judgmental of other people. Like, what, you've not been to therapy? What, you don't follow this therapist on Instagram? Like, you don't have self-awareness, and it's like some people don't want self-awareness. Some people are happy living their lives, and so I do think it can become you just constantly are finding a new thing that happened. Oh yeah, I've just seen this post on Instagram. That must have been what happened to me when I was 19, and I don't know, I had an argument with my uncle at Christmas dinner. And it's like, is it though? Or are you just finding new things to pathologise? And we do this in fitness all the time. We pathologise periods, we pathologise menopause, all of these things that require some consideration, but don't require like this wild amount of like coverage and discussion, because it's just like we then treat ourselves like victims. And it's like, we're not victims of these things.